The first thing Strange felt was not pain, but distortion, the sickening lurch of existence folding in on itself. He was no longer falling through space, but through meaning, tumbling between thoughts that screamed and memories that bled light. His body stretched across eternity, and yet every second carved deeper into him, as if the warp itself were dissecting his soul to understand what a human truly was. Colors had no logic here. Sounds became shapes, and gravity was an idea that changed its mind every heartbeat. Strange tried to speak an incantation, words of power that had bent reality before, but his own voice turned against him, echoing as laughter from creatures that had no mouths. Cloak of levitation fluttered around him like a wounded bird, its enchantments sparking and dying, its loyalty trembling in the storm of unreality. He reached out for something solid, but found only a surface of screaming glass. It reflected not his face, but 1,000 possibilities of himself, some still human, some warped into beasts of eyes and tendrils, some already kneeling before thrones of fire. "This isn't possible," he whispered, and the warp laughed again. Time no longer passed, it fed. The moment stretched until it broke, and then he felt ground beneath his hands, slick, pulsing, alive. The surface breathed under him like a dying thing. He rose unsteadily, his heartbeat echoing not just within his chest, but in the space around him. Each pulse rippled through the air like a beacon, drawing attention. In the distance, something stirred, the shadow of a thought, or the memory of a predator. He whispered a containment spell. The runes formed, then melted like wax. The magic refused him. Here, the warp did not obey. It mocked. Every sigil he traced writhed into shapes that whispered back secrets no mortal mind was meant to hear. "You do not command here," the wind said, though there was no wind, only whispers in the blood. And then he saw them, figures moving within the fog. Not demons, not yet, but remnants of minds. Echoes of psychers who had once glimpsed this realm and never returned. Their eyes were hollow galaxies, their hands clawing at the veil that held them prisoner. One reached toward Strange. Its fingers were smoke and bone. "We dreamt of truth," it moaned. "We found him instead." Who? Strange demanded, but his question scattered like dust. The answer came not as a voice, but as a vision. A great eye-opening across the horizon, vast enough to drown worlds, its pupil shifting like liquid glass. The sky rippled with its awareness. The warp had noticed him. Instinct screamed at him to flee, but there was nowhere to run. Reality was a circle, every direction folding back into the same endless storm. Strange closed his eyes, gathered what remained of his strength, and whispered a single name, not as a spell, but as a plea. "Protect me." No answer came. The warp devoured the sound, like it devoured everything pure. And then, far away, a shape rose, neither man nor god. Robed in shifting blue fire, wings of thought spreading across infinity. The eye turned toward it. The whispers quieted. The warp itself seemed to kneel. Something was coming. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. Strange could feel it pressing against his lungs, a weight of expectation, of awareness. Whatever presence had entered this fragment of the warp, it wasn't merely near it, was within him. Every thought he tried to hold dissolved into static, replaced by visions not his own. He saw cathedrals made of glass that screamed hymns to no god, stars bleeding into rivers of light, and armies of wings and eyes unfolding like blooming nightmares. The ground beneath him shifted. no longer flesh but feathers of ash. He stumbled forward, and every step echoed twice, once in his ears, and once inside his skull. He muttered an old mantra, words of the Ancient One that once calmed storms of chaos. But here they burned his tongue like molten iron. His own magic recoiled, afraid. The air smelled of burnt incense and rot, and the horizon pulsed like a heartbeat too large for the universe. A voice drifted from the fog. Strange, he froze. It was his own voice, but older, deeper, filled with the sound of breaking worlds. Who's there? Another figure emerged, a silhouette cloaked in the same crimson, but darker, scorched black at the edges, as if the warp itself had rewritten the cloak of levitation in its own language. The figure smiled a grotesque, knowing smile that mirrored his own. You already know, it said. You've seen the paths. You've dreamt the failure. This is one of them. Strange stepped back, shaking his head. No, you're what you become when you stop pretending control matters. The duplicate lifted its hand, and a wave of raw, impossible energy tore through the air. Spells collided, but here, the laws of reality were mockery. His shields folded in on themselves, turning into chains. His counterspell birthed 1,000 glowing moths that screamed in agony before dying mid-air. Strange hit the ground hard, gasping. The doppelganger loomed over him. The warp doesn't destroy, it said softly. It rewrites. Every idea, every fear, every hope becomes a prayer, and every prayer belongs to something greater. What are you? Strange hissed. The figure crouched beside him, face warping between thousands of expressions, his and not his. I am the echo of your arrogance. The proof that no mortal can master what he refuses to serve. You studied sorcery to control it, but in the warp, magic is control, and you have none. It placed a hand on his chest. Pain surged, not physical, but existential. He saw his own memories unravel. The Sanctum Wong's laughter, the moment he first channeled power through his broken hands. All of it peeled away, devoured by something vast and infinite. No, he gasped, but the echo smiled. Yes, and just like that, the copy vanished, reduced to dust that shimmered into glyphs across the air. Each glyph whispered a name. Each name hurt to remember. The horizon trembled. The great eye from before blinked once, slow, deliberate. A ripple of thought passed through the air, and Strange felt every cell in his body vibrating with a foreign rhythm. He looked up, trembling, as the sky itself bent into the shape of a face, one too vast to comprehend. Ever-changing, its features shifting from beauty to horror with every breath. And then he understood. The voice, the distortion, the laughter, it all belonged to a single entity. The architect of fate had taken notice. Tzeentch was watching. The gaze of Tzeentch fell upon him like the crushing weight of creation itself. Every thought he had ever spoken, every dream he had ever hidden, was laid bare in an instant. It was as if the god had peeled his mind open like a book written in pain. The colors of the world bled together, hues folding into impossible shades that seared his eyes and yet compelled him to stare. Tzeentch's form refused shape, feathers, flames, eyes, and hands, all shifting in a rhythm too perfect to be chaos and too wild to be order. Stephen Strange, the voice whispered, not as sound, but as realization. The name crawled across the inside of his skull, spoken in 1,000 tones, each a reflection of his fears. You have wandered into my dominion of will and change. You sought knowledge beyond mortal reach. You sought control. The words filled him with cold fire. I did not seek you, he said, forcing his voice against the storm. I was cast here by chance. Chance. The laughter came from everywhere, folding the ground into laughter's shape. Chance does not exist here. Every possibility lives, breathes, and screams at once. You are here because I willed it, or because you did. He fell to his knees as reality pulsed with the god's amusement. The warp expanded around him, showing visions that burned truth into his mind. Empires rising and collapsing within seconds. Worlds devoured by their own prayers. Sorcerers kneeling before their own reflections until madness became faith. Through it all, Tzeentch's presence whispered, "Do you understand yet?" Strange gritted his teeth. "I understand that you're afraid." The laughter stopped. He felt the temperature drop, the air thickening with unseen anger. His own words echoed like daggers through the realm. Tzeentch's many eyes opened at once, each focusing solely on him. Afraid, the god murmured, "Explain, Mortau." Strange forced himself to stand, blood dripping from his nose, his hands shaking as he conjured a sphere of golden light. "You need me. You found me, not the other way around. You drag mortals into your games because you can't win them alone. Your chaos pretending to be purpose." For the first time, the warp trembled. The gold light in his palm flared bright enough to burn back the mist. The demonic wind screamed, recoiling from its warmth. Strange felt the familiar surge of his old magic, the power of the Vishanti, still alive within him, defiant. "You talk of change," he growled, "but all you create is decay." The eye of Tzeentch blinked once. When it opened again, the god was closer, so close that Strange could see his own reflection fracturing across the creature's ever-shifting form. The voice came soft, like the edge of a knife across silk. "Then let me teach you true change." The light in his hand imploded. Pain flooded his body, not pain of flesh, but of identity. He screamed as he felt his own name peel away, letters dissolving into blue fire. Every thought he'd ever had twisted into new forms, reshaping themselves into questions without answers. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the god's hand reaching forward, made of eyes, tongues, and stars. It pressed against his forehead, and his soul cracked like glass. When he awoke again, the sky was gone. Only whispers remained, but one of them was his own. When awareness returned, it came in whispers. They rose and fell in rhythm with a distant pulse, as if the warp itself was breathing. Strange opened his eyes, and the world around him shimmered like a dying star reflected in a mirror of blood. He lay upon a surface that was neither stone nor flesh, a shifting mosaic of faces pressed beneath translucent skin. They stared upward, mouths open in silent song, each one mouthing a different prayer. The air was thick with incense and despair. The scent of Promethean fires mingled with rot, filling every breath with corruption. Strange struggled to his feet, his body still trembling from whatever Tzeentch had done to him. The ground stretched endlessly, filled with towers made of bone and glass, each one carved into the shape of screaming figures. Their mouths were open, not to wail, but to chant. It took him a moment to realize the sound he was hearing wasn't just in the air, it was inside his skull. Countless voices speaking in perfect harmony, each syllable vibrating through his nerves. The choir of the forgotten. He covered his ears, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't noise. It was thought. A hymn built from the remains of 1 billion minds. Each note resonated with truth and agony. Each voice had once been human, Skura, sorcerer, all who had sought the warp's secrets and were now its eternal chorus. Tzeentch stumbled forward. The sky rippled with color, rivers of light cutting across the horizon. Where they touched, time bled. He saw echoes of men dissolving into ash, women whispering spells that devoured their faces, children praying until their tongues turned to dust. He tried not to look, but the warp allowed no mercy. Every sight demanded witness. A voice emerged from within the choir, clear, soft, commanding. "Stephen Tzeentch." He froze. The voice was familiar, warm. Christine's voice. He turned sharply, scanning the landscape. There was no one. Only towers of chanting flesh, their mouths moving in perfect unison. "Christine," he whispered. The name hurt to say. "You sought power to save them all." The choir replied, every mouth speaking as one. "And yet you saved no one. You came seeking control, but control is the first lie. Show yourself." He shouted. A column of light descended from the sky, forming the outline of a figure, ethereal, transparent, glowing blue. It looked like Christine. Her eyes were empty, her lips trembling between sorrow and judgment. "You think this is punishment," she said, "but this is grace. The warp remembers everything. It remembers you." He took a step closer, voice breaking. "You're not real. You're another trick." She smiled faintly. "If so, then so are you." Before he could reply, the ground shifted again. The faces beneath the glass began to hum louder. Their prayers turned violent, desperate. The sky pulsed with red lightning, and the light that had formed Christine shattered like stained glass. Each shard became an eye, all staring at him. A wave of psychic energy crashed through the plane, throwing him backward. The choir screamed as one, and for the first time, he heard the words behind their song. Serve the architect. Serve change. Serve fate. He gasped, choking on the air as realization dawned. The choir wasn't praying to Tzeentch. They were part of him. Every soul that entered this place, every broken will, every corrupted mind became one note in the God's eternal hymn. And now the song was changing its rhythm to match his heartbeat. The pulse grew louder, hammering against his skull. Tzeentch clutched his temples as the chorus shifted from melody to command. The words no longer whispered, they demanded. His vision blurred, his veins glowing faintly blue as tendrils of warp light crawled beneath his skin. He felt his will being pulled apart, threads unraveling into the song. He staggered forward, desperate for silence, and found himself before a massive structure, a cathedral carved into the shape of a screaming skull. Its teeth the gates, its hollow eyes spilling green fire. The chanting intensified. Faces pressed against the walls from inside, mouths stretching open as if yearning to be free. He could feel their voices inside his mind now, merging with his thoughts, bending them. He took a step back, but the ground clung to his boots, alive with veins of light. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, dragging him closer to the gate. He tried to summon a teleportation sigil, anything to break away, but the symbols turned on him, twisting mid-air, rearranging themselves into a single word that burned into his mind. Stay. The cathedral's doors opened without a sound. Inside, light poured from floating shards of glass that orbited a central dais. Each shard contained a soul, screaming silently, trapped within its own reflection. At the center stood a throne of metal and bone, occupied by a being draped in a cloak of shifting symbols. Its face was obscured by a mask of mirrored glass, showing Strange 1,000 versions of himself, dead, broken, kneeling. "Welcome, Sorcerer Supreme," the figure said. Its voice was not one, but many men, women, monsters, and angels speaking together. "The warp remembers greatness. You are not the first to defy the gods. You are not the first to fall." Strange's breath caught. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head. "A servant of memory. We are the forgotten, bound to sing the glory of the architect. Every truth we once held, every spell we once cast, now belongs to him." It gestured, and the shards of glass turned toward Strange. Within each, he saw a face, psychers from the Imperium, Eldar, seers, even demons, once proud enough to call themselves gods. All of them trapped, their souls feeding the endless song. You want me to join them?" Strange said, his voice breaking. "Want?" The figure's laughter echoed through the chamber like a blade scraping against marble. "The warp does not want. It takes. The song must grow. Every new voice brings harmony to his will." The walls trembled. The glass around him began to hum louder, glowing with unnatural heat. Strange raised a hand, conjuring a sphere of energy. This time it held, bright and golden, a fragment of Earth's light piercing the warp. The voices recoiled, hissing, their song faltering for the first time. The figure on the throne stood. Its mask cracked down the middle, revealing beneath it a void filled with blue fire. "Light cannot survive here," it whispered. "Every flame feeds the storm." It raised its hand, and the air itself shattered. The spell in Strange's palm exploded. He was thrown across the room, crashing into the cathedral wall. The souls inside screamed, and the glass around him fractured, cutting into his skin. Blood floated upward, becoming crimson sparks devoured by the warp's hunger. The figure approached, each step echoing like thunder. "You can't silence the choir, Strange," it said. "You can only learn to sing." He pressed his hand against the bleeding wall and whispered through clenched teeth, "Then I'll change the song." The warp trembled in response, not in defiance, but in curiosity. The air thickened with whispers, as if the warp itself leaned closer to hear his defiance. Strange rose slowly, his cloak frayed and his eyes burning with gold and blue light, his own magic fighting the corruption crawling through his veins. The cathedral pulsed around him, alive, reacting to his will. The trapped faces in the walls screamed louder, their cries turning to words, each syllable a prayer, each prayer a chain. "You cannot fight eternity," the being said, voice shifting between mockery and awe. Its mirrored mask rippled, revealing flashes of countless faces, some of them his own. "Your defiance is beautiful, Doctor, but beauty here is only another form of suffering." Strange clenched his fists, the crimson fabric of his cloak flickering with sparks. "Then let it suffer." He lifted his hands and wove a spell he'd sworn never to use again. The spell of the empty Suna ritual, meant to draw upon cosmic energy beyond mortal reach. On Earth, it would have torn reality apart, but here, in a realm already broken, it became something else entirely. Light erupted from his palms, pure and golden, piercing through the darkness like a blade. The hymn faltered. The choir's endless chant wavered. Souls, trapped within glass, screamed, the sound so loud it split the air. The cathedral walls cracked open, bleeding liquid fire. Strange felt his power rip through him, burning his nerves, tearing through his bones, but he didn't stop. The light surged outward, consuming the mirrored figure on the throne. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the voice returned, softer, darker, infinitely closer. You think light destroys darkness. Strange. But in the warp, light is just another mask for power. The shards of glass rose from the ground, orbiting him. Each one reflected not the cathedral, but scenes of other worlds, countless realities in which Strange had made different choices. One where he had surrendered to Dormammu. One where he had become Death's herald. One where he had never survived his first accident. They all stared back, whispering in unison, "You can't change fate. You are part of it." The golden light flickered. The spell began to collapse, devoured by the raw will of the warp. Strange fell to his knees as the shards spun faster, forming a vortex around him. The choir sang again, louder than ever, but this time the words carried rhythm, his rhythm. The melody twisted, reshaping itself to match his breathing, his pulse. He realized too late what was happening. The warp wasn't resisting him anymore. It was learning from him. His light dimmed. His power didn't vanish, it multiplied, echoing through every shard, every trapped soul. The cathedral became a living organism of magic and madness. Fueled by his defiance, the being's laughter echoed again, but now it sounded different, reverent. "You've done what none before you could," it said, its form rebuilding from smoke and light. "You've given the choir a new verse. You've changed the song." Strange looked up, exhausted, trembling. "Then let it be mine." The being smiled, a terrible, glorious expression. "It already is." The last thing he saw before the cathedral dissolved into mist was the faces in the glass, turning toward him not in suffering, but in devotion. He had not escaped the choir. He had become its conductor. There was no waking this time. There was only becoming. Dr. Stephen Strange no longer stood in a place, nor in time. He existed in a rhythm, an eternal tide between thought and unbeing. His senses had become instruments for something vast and unknowable. The choir of the forgotten had dissolved into him, and he into it. When he breathed, the warp shuddered. When he thought, it answered. The architect had not broken him. It had rewritten him. The air around him no longer obeyed physics. Each exhale painted constellations of smoke and light. Each blink erased a star. His cloak, once red and noble, now shimmered with impossible colors, the threads moving like serpents made of stained glass. Every heartbeat echoed with whispers that weren't his own. He should have felt fear. Instead, he felt clarity. For the first time since falling into this realm, he saw the warp not as madness, but as structure chaotic. Yes, but not without purpose. Every storm had a pattern. Every scream followed a logic. Reality was an illusion drawn too tightly around infinite truth, yet the price of understanding was hunger. He looked down at his hands, watching the skin crawl like liquid mercury. His veins pulsed with blue fire, his fingers trailing smoke that formed and reformed into ancient sigils. He could feel the power raw, endless, seductive. With a thought, he could undo galaxies. With a whisper, he could bind time into a loop and make it eat itself. But beneath that power, a voice lingered. Not Tzeentch's, his own. "This isn't me," he murmured, and the sound cracked the air. "I'm not a god. I'm not." "This," a ripple answered him. Space itself bent into a circle, and from it emerged a figure hooded, robed, tall as a cathedral spire. Its wings were made of thought, each feather inscribed with words that changed too fast to read. Its face shifted constantly. taking shapes of people Strange had known. Christine, Wong, Mort, Doma Muchuan, speaking in perfect synchrony. "You were never merely human," it said. Strange staggered back, his cloak tightening around him like a shield. "You're not real. Reality is a suggestion," the being said, taking a step closer. "We are emissaries of change. You defied the architect, and he took notice. You bent the song, and now the melody seeks its composer." He felt it, then an invisible thread connecting his chest to the being's hand. The air hummed, charged with impossible energy. "What do you want from me?" The being tilted its ever-changing head. "To offer you what all sorcerers crave, knowledge without end, power without cost, the gift of change." The words dripped like poison and promised both. Strange clenched his fists. "I've seen what your gifts do. They destroy everything they touch. Everything that resists," the emissary corrected. "But you've already begun to evolve. You think your power came from the Vishanti. No, Stephen. They were gatekeepers. We are the gate itself." The world rippled, and suddenly he saw Itty's life played in fragments. The car crash, the surgeries, the sanctum, the countless times he bent reality to his will. Every decision had led here. Every defiance had echoed across eternity. He was not a victim of chaos. He was its chosen student. The emissary extended its hand. "Take it," it said softly. "Accept what you already are." The air stilled. Strange stared at the hand, trembling. He could feel the truth radiating from it, our truth, both glorious and damning. If he touched it, there would be no turning back. And yet, deep within him, a part of his soul whispered what he'd always known. Knowledge always demands a price. He reached out anyway. When his fingers brushed the emissary's hand, the world ignited. There was no heat, no flammingly revelation. Every molecule in his body expanded outward into infinity, dissolving and reforming across 1,000 versions of himself. He saw every life he could have lived unfolding simultaneously, stretching across realities like strands of light woven by madness. In one vision, he ruled as sorcerer supreme of a dying earth. In another, he was a creature of pure energy devouring galaxies in the name of balance. Every form, every fate existed at once. The warp roared approval. It did not have a voice, yet Strange felt its delight pulse through the fabric of his existence. "This is not corruption," the emissary's voice whispered from everywhere at once. "This is understanding. You were always a question, Dr. Strange. Now you are the answer." He wanted to reject it, to scream, but his body no longer obeyed. Instead, his thoughts reshaped themselves into symbols of power-pure ideas that bent the laws of magic. The runes of the warp spiraled across his skin, embedding themselves beneath his flesh, moving like veins of blue fire. His heart beat in time with the warp's pulse, each thrum sending waves of psychic energy that bent reality around him. Visions flooded his mind, not of the past or present, but of futures branching infinitely. He saw the Imperium of man burning under the light of false gods. He saw Tzeentch's laughter echoing across dead stars, and he saw himself standing at the center of it all, not as savior, not as conqueror, but as something between. "You see it now," the emissary said. "Change is not chaos. It is the only truth. Everything shifts: thought, flesh, will, destiny. Only fools cling to form. Only mortals fear the storm." Strange's voice trembled as he spoke. "And what of choice? Does change erase that too? The being's many faces turned toward him. Choice is change. The architect does not take your will, he refines it. You have always sought to control power. Now you will become power. He felt himself pulled upward, as though gravity had inverted. The warp unfolded beneath him like an ocean made of living light. The emissary spread its wings, and the entire plane seemed to kneel. Strange realized then that he was no longer standing before a servant. He was standing in the presence of Tzeentch itself for one of its reflections. The god's voice filled the universe, soft yet infinite. You were never meant to heal the world. You were meant to understand why it breaks. The words burned into him. For the first time, he felt something like peace, horrible and profound. The power coursing through him no longer resisted his will. It sang with it. He could see the pattern, now the truth, that change was not destruction but evolution. And that resistance was the only sin the warp could not forgive. His cloak floated upward, transforming entirely. Its edges shimmered with the symbols of the ninefold path, its threads whispering prophecies in forgotten tongues. He raised his hands, and the warp answered not as chaos, but as perfect harmony. For a moment, he felt infinite. For a moment, he believed. Then came the screams. They erupted from inside him, the voices of the choir that had merged with his soul. They twisted his peace into torment, his enlightenment into agony. Their chorus turned against him, singing his name in reverse, pulling at his mind with claws of regret. The warp's gift was never free. He fell back to his knees, clutching his head. The emissary watched, silent and unmoving. Through the chaos, one phrase echoed above all others, clear and absolute. You are the bridge now. The warp's light dimmed. The visions faded, and in their place, Strange began to hear a heartbeat again, his own, but slower, deeper, and not entirely human. The pulse of the warp thrummed through him like a second heart, resonating with the rhythm of galaxies dying and being born. Strange hovered between form and formlessness, suspended in a storm of thoughts made flesh. His hands no longer obeyed him. They moved on their own, tracing sigils in the air that glowed in colors human sight was never meant to name. Each gesture summoned visions of civilizations collapsing under their own enlightenment, gods screaming as their creations unmade them. It was intoxicating. It was horrifying. He was no longer certain where his own thoughts ended and the warp began. The choir whispered ceaselessly in the corners of his consciousness, feeding him fragments of wisdom, fragments of despair. They sang of futures that could not exist, of victories that dissolved into loss. He understood now why so few minds survived here. The truth was too vast, too merciless. But amid that avalanche of madness, a familiar memory flickered. Christine's laughter, faint and warm. It broke through the endless symphony for an instant, grounding him. For that heartbeat, he remembered Earth. He remembered the purpose behind every spell he had ever cast, to heal, not to rule. The warp felt his hesitation and coiled around him like a predator testing its prey. Why cling to the illusion of self? Tzeentch's voice rose from the chaos, melodic and cruel. You could unmake destiny itself. Every lie that bound you, every truth that betrayed you, all of it can bend before your will. Strange faced the storm, his features flickering between man and something far less human. Power without purpose is just another prison, he said. His voice reverberated like thunder across the void. I came here seeking understanding, not obedience. The laughter that followed shook the firmament. And yet you serve, as all do. You think your defiance is rebellion, but it is still a part of my design. Every question you ask is another verse in my song. You are change itself, Stephen Strange. You are mine. The god's form loomed above him, now a vortex of wings, eyes, and impossible geometries. Every atom of the warp bowed in reverence. Strange felt his body begin to dissolve, his form stretching into patterns of living energy. For one terrifying instant, he saw his reflection in Tzeentch, two beings made of motion and will, identical in purpose, divided only by scale. He screamed not in pain, but in realization. No being controls change, he roared. Not even you. His cry ignited the warp. Every soul in the choir echoed it, their song turning from worship to rebellion. The air fractured, bleeding light and shadow. Strange drew upon everything his earthborn magic, his training, his defiant sand, forged a single symbol from his will. It shone brighter than suns, brighter than memory. The warp howled. Reality itself buckled. For a moment, Tzeentch faltered, and in that heartbeat of hesitation, Stephen Strange broke free. He fell through light and void, through 1,000 dying stars and 1 billion screaming voices. When he landed, he was alone once more. The warp was quiet. His cloak hung in tatters. His skin glowed faintly blue beneath its surface. In his reflection upon the mirrored ground, his eyes burned with the colors of the warp dot. He was free but forever changed. There is a silence in the warp that comes only after creation dies. Dr. Strange stood within it, half man, half echo. His body was still, but the air around him pulsed like the heart of a living world. The ground beneath his boots shimmered, smooth as obsidian glass, reflecting 1,000 broken versions of his face. None of them were human anymore. He had escaped Tzeentch's grasp, or so he thought, but freedom in the warp was only another shape of captivity. The choir no longer screamed, they whispered now, reverent and fearful, their voices threading through his thoughts like a hymn woven of knives. They did not call him strange. They called him the sorcerer of change. He looked into the horizon where time melted into thought. Fragments of stars drifted like ash in a sea of memory. The warp itself seemed to watch him, waiting for its experiment to continue. He was no longer prey, nor entirely the predator. He was both, suspended between order and the impossible. Every step he took reshaped the ground, twisting geometry into patterns the human mind could not survive. He could hear the rhythm of the universe's pulse, too loud, too perfect. The old sorcerer supreme within him whispered in terror, begging him to stop before he lost himself entirely. But the new voice, quieter, stronger, answered with calm certainty, "There is no self to lose." A ripple broke the horizon. From it emerged a being draped in golden armor, scorched black, its insignia that of the Imperium Man, Astartes librarian, or what remained of one. His psychic aura burned with the last embers of humanity's faith, his face scarred by exposure to the warp's truth. He held a staff engraved with the aquila, now fractured into 2 staring eyes. "Identify yourself," the librarian demanded, his voice echoing through the nothing. "No mortal treads this path without sanction." Strange tilted his head. "No mortal," he agreed. The librarian's eyes widened as he sensed the raw, shifting power before him. "You carry the taint," he growled. "You've been touched by the changer of ways. Speak your allegiance." Strange's laughter was soft, almost mournful. "Allegiance, once, I served balance, then knowledge. Now," he gestured to the chaos surrounding them, "now I serve the truth that binds them all." The librarian raised his staff, Then you are corruption, and I am its undoing." He struck with a psychic blast so fierce it shattered the ground. Strange raised his hand, not to defend, but to reshape. The attack folded mid-air, turning into a spiral of light that dissolved harmlessly into his palm. He closed his fingers, and the energy became a star trapped in glass. The librarian stumbled back, gasping. "Impossible, not impossible," Strange said, stepping forward, "merely different." The air around him shimmered as his cloak spread wide, flowing like liquid flame. The runes of the warp danced across it, alive, whispering prophecies of doom and rebirth. "You see corruption," he continued, "but what if the warp is not disease, but evolution? What if your emperor is just another cage for the truth?" The librarian screamed and charged. Strange sighed. He raised his hand, and with a thought, turned the space between them into glass. The Astartes froze mid-stride, his body suspended in time, motionless, silent, perfect. Strange walked past him, every step echoing like a clock striking eternity. He paused beside the frozen warrior and whispered, almost kindly, "Change is mercy. It frees even those who refuse it." Then the glass shattered. The librarian's form disintegrated into particles of light, absorbed by the endless storm. Strange closed his eyes, and for the first time, the warp did not resist him. It obeyed. The sorcerer of chaos had risen. The storm that followed was not weather. It was will. The warp rippled outward, reacting to Strange's ascension like water touched by lightning. He could feel every atom vibrating in sympathy, every mind echoing his name in tones of reverence and dread. 100,000 lost psychers dreamed of him in that instant. Their dying thoughts formed a constellation that bled light into the void. He stood at its center, motionless, his eyes open to truths that burned lesser minds to ash. He could see the threads of reality, the weave of time and emotion, of faith and entropy sprawled before him like the veins of a living god. It was exquisite, terrible. He realized that he could tug upon them and worlds would die. Empires would fall. Stars would weep, and still, something inside him resisted. The man he had been, the doctor, the protector, the human watched all of this unfold from deep within, horrified. "This is not salvation," that voice whispered. "This is surrender." Stranger's lips parted, but the sound that escaped was not his own. It was the warp itself speaking through him. "Surrender is the first act of creation," it said. The choir answered with harmony so beautiful it fractured reality. They sang of rebirth and transformation, of the old universe shedding its skin to reveal another beneath. The noise became color, the color became light, and from that light emerged visions of mortals and gods alike kneeling before him. To them, he was neither hero nor monster. He was inevitability. He looked upon them with something close to pity. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I was supposed to heal, to save. But there's no healing in infinity, only change." From the depths of the storm came laughter, the unmistakable echo of Tzeentch, vast and unfathomable. "And you have learned, my champion," the voice purred. "Change is all that remains when purpose dies." The warp itself coalesced before him, forming the god's reflection, a vast shape woven from serpents of light, feathered wings, and eyes without number. Tzeentch regarded him not as prey now, but as kin. "You defied me," the god said. "You remade my hymn. You earned your title." Stranger's cloak lifted in the storm's invisible wind, his form half shadow, half-living fire. "I didn't do it for you." "Of course not," Tzeentch replied, smiling with 1,000 faces. "Change never serves its master. That is why it endures." The god extended a hand, a gesture of both mockery and blessing. "Walk with me, sorcerer of chaos. Together, we will paint new futures upon the corpse of this reality. Let the Imperium rot in its delusion of order. Let the gods of man drown in their prayers. Let the warp sing." For a long moment, Strange said nothing. The power thrummed in his veins, the temptation wrapping around him like a lover's breath. He could unmake pain. He could rewrite failure. He could become the answer to every question the universe had ever feared to ask. But the memory of Christine's laughter surfaced again, soft, human, fragile. A sound untouched by the warp. "I am not your prophet," he said. "I am your consequence." The warp screamed. The god's laughter broke into shards of thunder. Strange raised both hands, and the storm itself obeyed his defiance. The realm convulsed, the light bending inward, collapsing upon itself. For the first time in eternity, Tzeentch flinched. "Foolish mortal," the god hissed. "Do you think you can destroy what is change?" Strange's voice was calm, resolute. "No, but I can remind it of what it used to be." The warp split open, bleeding raw creation. Strange stepped forward, his body dissolving into energy, his form scattering across every possible timeline. His final whisper echoed through the infinite. "Even gods evolve." Then the light swallowed everything. The explosion of light didn't end. It simply changed shape. The warp, ancient and infinite, recoiled as something new unfurled within it. Not destruction, not order, but a stillness it had never known. Stephen Strange hung at the eye of it, suspended in the collapse of meaning. All around him, the fragments of creation turned over like leaves in the wind. Demons screamed and dissolved into smoke. Stars flickered and reappeared as if exhaling. The choir fell silent for the first time in eternity. He had become something the warp could not categorize. Not mortal, not God. A paradox made flesh. His body glowed faintly, transparent, veins pulsing with both light and shadow. He could feel the heartbeat of existence itself, not a sound, but a rhythm that sang across every possible reality. For a fleeting moment, he felt pity for Tzeentch, for the gods, for every being that had ever tried to cage infinity. From the void came the echo of the god's voice, fractured now, uncertain. "You cannot sustain it," Tzeentch whispered. "The warp devours all form. It will devour you too." Strange opened his eyes. They burned with blue fire. Then let it. He raised his hands, palms outward, and allowed the last of his resistance to fall away. The warp surged into him like a tidal wave of molten dreams, and he did not fight it. He guided it. The madness, the fury, the infinite motion. He bent them toward harmony. For the first time, the warp listened. Its screaming softened, its violence slowing to a measured pulse. It was like taming a hurricane by becoming its center. He felt himself splitting, millions of selves fanning out across every timeline, each carrying a spark of his will. In one, he was worshipped as a god. In another, hunted as a demon. In another, still, forgotten entirely. Every version sang the same truth. Change was not chaos. It was creation, raw and unbound. And yet, even as he expanded beyond mortality, a tear slid down his cheek, a remnant of humanity clinging to what was left of him. He whispered into the silence, a prayer meant for no one. "Christine, forgive me. I found the answer, but I lost the question. The words echoed through the warp, shaping it once again. Where they passed, the storms quieted, the demons knelt. And from their ruins rose something luminous, a new order, born not of control, but of understanding. The warp had always devoured knowledge, but now it learned. Stranger's essence intertwined with it, not as a ruler, not as a servant, but as an equal. Eons could have passed, or perhaps only seconds. When the light faded, what remained was a figure standing on a bridge of fractured stars, cloaked, silent, eternal. His face was calm, eyes twin vortexes of creation and decay. He looked neither triumphant nor damned. He simply was. Below him stretched the galaxies, their faint lights flickering through the veil of the immaterium. He could see terror, so distant. It was almost myth, and the faint outline of humanity clawing toward meaning in a universe that never cared. For a heartbeat, he thought of returning, but he knew he no longer belonged there. Behind him, the warp stirred again, whispering in tones both fearful and reverent. Sorcerer of chaos. He turned once more toward the endless void and spoke softly, his voice rippling through dimensions. No, not chaos, not anymore. His cloak unfurled like the wings of a dying star, scattering into radiant shards that vanished into the ether. And then he stepped forward, not to fall, not to ascend, but to become the thing all realities would remember only as a rumor, a myth whispered between gods and monsters alike.